Her shoes clicked past my desk at exactly 7:15, like they did every single morning. I didn't look up. I never did. Looking up meant hoping she might notice me. And I'd learned a long time ago that hope was expensive. My name is Michael Carson, and I work as an executive assistant on the 42nd floor of a glass tower in downtown Chicago. From where I sit, I can see Lake Michigan spreading out like spilled mercury, the sailboats cutting white lines through gray water. Most people see me as someone who gets things done without making noise. Quiet, dependable, forgettable. Before we continue, please tell us where in the world you're watching from. We love seeing how far our stories travel. It reminds us that hope and second chances are universal languages. My boss, Wilma Grant, built this tech empire from a failed startup and sheer will. She's brilliant, ruthless, and untouchable in ways that make grown men check their phones during meetings just to avoid her stare. When she walks into a room, conversations die mid-sentence. People straighten their spines like soldiers. She wears tailored suits in shades of power, charcoal, navy, blood red, and keeps her face as readable as polished marble. Every day she walks right past me like I'm part of the office furniture. I could be a filing cabinet. I could be a printer. It wouldn't make any difference. But I noticed things about her anyway. Small details that kept me employed. She drank her coffee black, never with cream or sugar. When she was about to fire someone, she switched from her regular pen to the silver one her father gave her before he died. She stayed late every Thursday night to review financial reports alone in her office. I knew these things because knowing them meant I could anticipate her needs. Anticipating her needs meant staying employed. And staying employed meant everything. I had a daughter named Gloria. She was 7 years old with dark curls and a gap-toothed smile that could light up a room. Her mother and I divorced 3 years ago when Rachel decided she wanted more than a struggling husband who worked 60-hour weeks for average pay. She remarried quickly to a man named Derek, who owned car dealerships across 3 states. They lived in a house with a pool and a 3-car garage. Gloria had her own bathroom with a TV in it. The custody arrangement gave me every other weekend and Wednesday nights. It wasn't enough time with my daughter, but it was all the court would give me. The child support payments came out of my account automatically on the 1st of every month. If I missed one payment, Rachel's lawyer would be on me faster than I could blink. If I lost this job, I'd lose everything that mattered. So I stayed invisible. I stayed useful. I stayed employed. That Tuesday morning started exactly like every other morning. I arrived at 6:45, made the expensive coffee that Wilma preferred, and organized her schedule for the day. Board meeting at 9 o'clock. Lunch with investors at 12:30. Conference call with the London office at 3 o'clock. Everything was color-coded and perfect. I heard the elevator chime at 7:15, and then came the sound of her heels against marble. Click, click, click. She walked past my desk without slowing down, already on her phone talking about quarterly projections. She disappeared into her glass-walled office, and the door closed with a soft click. Normal, predictable, safe. Then a delivery man appeared carrying the biggest bouquet of flowers I'd ever seen. 3 dozen red roses in a crystal vase that must have cost a fortune. He set them on my desk and asked me to sign for them. My hands shook as I wrote my name. There was a small white envelope tucked between the stems with my name written in elegant handwriting. Before I could open it, I felt the temperature in the office drop. I looked up and saw Wilma standing in her doorway. She was staring at the roses with an expression I'd never seen before. Her face had gone blank, but her eyes were dark and dangerous. She looked like someone had just slapped her, and she was deciding whether to slap back or burn the whole building down. She walked toward my desk slowly, deliberately. Each step was measured and controlled. When she reached me, she looked down at the flowers and then at me. Her voice came out soft and cold when she asked who sent them. I told her I didn't know. She told me to open the card. Inside was a single line. "Thank you for seeing me when no one else did. You saved my life." T. I read it 3 times and still had no idea what it meant. I'd never saved anyone's life. This had to be a mistake. But Wilma didn't see it that way. She looked at me like she was seeing me for the first time in the 13 months I'd worked for her, and what she saw made her angry. She asked me who T was. I told her I didn't know. She didn't believe me. Or maybe she wanted to believe me, but couldn't quite manage it. She took the card and slipped it into her pocket, then told me we'd figure this out. She went back to her office and made phone calls for the next hour. Through the glass walls, I could see her pacing and talking, her expression tight with something that looked like fear. The rest of the morning felt like drowning in slow motion. People walked past my desk and stared at the roses. Some made jokes about secret admirers. I smiled and said nothing, but I could feel Wilma watching me through the glass. She was supposed to be in meetings all day, but she canceled everything. She stayed in her office making calls and typing on her computer, but every few minutes her eyes would drift to me. At 1 p.m., she called me into her office and asked me how long I'd worked for her. When I said 13 months, she nodded like that explained something. Then she asked if I'd ever lied to her or given her reason to doubt my loyalty. I said no to both. She studied me for a long moment before telling me she was moving my desk into her office. She wanted me where she could see me. I understood what that meant. It wasn't a promotion. It was surveillance. She was going to watch me every second of every day until she figured out who sent those roses and why. But I couldn't say no to Wilma Grant. Nobody said no to Wilma Grant. By 3 p.m., I was set up in a corner of her office with a view of the lake that I was too anxious to enjoy. She worked at her desk across the room, and every few minutes she'd glance at me, checking, making sure I was still there. I felt like an insect pinned to a board. When 6 o'clock came around and people started leaving, she told me I could go home. But then she said something that changed everything. She said if I was going to sit in her office, I should call her Wilma instead of Ms. Grant. On the train ride home, I tried to figure out who could have sent those roses. The card said I'd saved someone's life, but I couldn't remember doing anything that dramatic. Then I remembered something from 7 months ago. I'd been working late and found a man having a breakdown in the parking garage. He was sobbing so hard he couldn't breathe. I'd sat with him on the dirty floor and talked him through a panic attack. We'd sat there for 20 minutes. He'd told me his first name was Thomas, but nothing else. When he finally calmed down, he'd thanked me and left. I'd never seen him again. Could that have been T? But if it was, how had he found me? And why send flowers now, 7 months later? None of it made sense. When I got home, I checked on Gloria. It was Wednesday, so she was staying with me, and then lay in bed staring at the ceiling. The roses had changed everything. I'd gone from invisible to visible in a single morning, and now Wilma Grant was watching me like I was a puzzle she needed to solve. I didn't sleep much that night. Thursday morning arrived too quickly. I got to the office at 6:45 and found that someone had moved the roses from my old desk to my new one in Wilma's office. There was a handwritten note on her stationery sitting next to the vase. It said not to throw them away because she wanted to know who T was. Wilma arrived at 7:15 without her usual phone call. For the first time since I'd started working there, she looked directly at me and said good morning. Then she asked if I'd figured out who sent the flowers. I told her no. She studied me for a moment before asking me to tell her about myself. So I did. I told her about Gloria and the custody arrangement. I told her about Rachel and her new husband with the car dealerships. I told her about my one-bedroom apartment and taking the train to work because I couldn't afford parking. I didn't tell her about the constant fear of losing everything or the bills that kept me up at night. Some things felt too personal to share even when your boss was suddenly interested in your life. Wilma listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said I was a good father. Then she told me something I didn't expect. She said her own father had left when she was 6 and never came back. She said when she saw men who stayed and fought for their kids, She respected that. The morning passed in strange tension. We both worked at our separate desks, but the space between us felt charged with something I couldn't name. Every time she looked at me, I felt exposed, like she was peeling back layers trying to see what was underneath. At 11:30, the receptionist brought up another delivery, a dozen more red roses in a glass vase. Wilma stood up so fast her chair rolled backward. She crossed the room and grabbed the card before I could reach it. She read it out loud. It said T was coming to see me soon, and we had things to discuss. Wilma's face went pale and then red. She demanded to know who this person was and why they were coming here. I told her I honestly didn't know. She believed me, I think, but that didn't make her less angry. She called security and told them to pull all the delivery logs for the flowers. She wanted to know what company delivered them and who placed the order. When she hung up, she turned back to me and asked about the man I'd helped in the parking garage. I described him as best I could. Older than me, maybe 50s, gray hair, expensive suit, having a panic attack. I told her he'd said his name was Thomas, and nothing more. Something changed in Wilma's face when I said that name. Recognition mixed with fear mixed with anger. She walked to the window and stared out at the lake for a long time. Then she said a name I didn't recognize. Thomas Bennett. She explained that Thomas Bennett was her biggest competitor. He ran Bennett Technologies, and 3 years ago his company had tried to buy hers. She'd refused. Since then they've been fighting over every client, every contract, every piece of market share. Last year his company sued hers for patent infringement. The lawsuit cost her millions to settle. She told me that 6 months ago, Bennett Technologies went through a major crisis. Their CFO embezzled money. Their stock crashed, and Thomas Bennett had a very public breakdown. He disappeared for 3 weeks, and his board almost removed him as CEO. I realized that the broken man I'd found in the parking garage was one of the most powerful people in Chicago tech, and I'd had no idea. Wilma asked what he could possibly want to discuss with me. I had no answer. She studied me for a long moment, then told me to pack my things. She said I was coming home with her. When I protested, she explained that Thomas Bennett was dangerous in every way that mattered. If he was trying to get to her through me, then I was in danger, and she didn't let her people get hurt. I tried to argue that I wasn't her people, I was just her assistant. She said that working for her made me her responsibility. She was already canceling her afternoon meetings and sending emails. She told me to call whoever picked up Gloria and arrange for my daughter to stay somewhere else that night. I called Rachel. She was annoyed but agreed to keep Gloria an extra night. I followed Wilma to her car because I didn't know what else to do. Her house was in Lincoln Park, one of those neighborhoods where every house looked magazine perfect. Hers was a 3-story brick building with a flawless lawn and flower boxes in every window. Inside, everything was clean, modern, and expensive. White and gray everywhere. Art on the walls that I didn't recognize, but knew must be valuable. She told me the guest room was upstairs, and to make myself comfortable. Then she disappeared to make phone calls. I went upstairs and found a guest room bigger than my apartment's living room. The bed was covered in white sheets that looked like they'd never been slept in. I sat on the edge and put my head in my hands. What was I doing here? Downstairs I could hear Wilma's voice, muffled but intense. She was handling whatever crisis this had become. I texted Gloria to apologize for missing our Wednesday night together. She texted back immediately saying it was okay and she loved me. I stared at those words for a long time. She was 7 years old and already learning to be disappointed by me. Wilma knocked on my door and told me she'd ordered Chinese food. She'd changed out her suit into jeans and a sweater. She looked younger, more human. She apologized for dragging me into her problems. I told her it was fine, even though it wasn't. She said when Thomas Bennett showed up, and he would show up, she needed me to tell her everything about that night in the garage. Every detail, every word. I agreed. I lay in that expensive bed that night, and tried to figure out how my life had gotten this complicated in less than 48 hours. The answer came the next morning when Thomas Bennett walked into Wilma's office building and asked to see me. Listen, if you've made it this far in the story, you're invested. You want to know what happens to them. But here's the thing. Most people scroll past these stories without subscribing. They watch, they enjoy, and they disappear. If this story matters to you, if you actually care how it ends, hit that subscribe button, please. It takes 2 seconds. And if you don't, you'll probably forget about this channel and never another amazing stories from me. I didn't sleep well in Wilma's guest room. The bed was too soft. Everything smelled like lavender and money, and I kept waking up forgetting where I was. At 6 a.m., I gave up and got ready for work in yesterday's clothes. Wilma was already in the kitchen making coffee when I came downstairs. She was back in work mode, navy suit, heels, hair pulled back tight. The woman in jeans from last night had vanished completely. We drove to the office in silence and arrived by 6:30 when the building was almost empty. The head of security came up at 7 o'clock with a folder of delivery records. Both bouquets had been sent from premier florist downtown, paid in cash. No name on the order. The florist described a man in his mid-50s in an expensive suit who came in and paid cash for the flowers. They had security camera footage, but the angle was bad and the man's face wasn't clear. But Wilma recognized him anyway. She said it was definitely Thomas Bennett. She told security to let her know immediately if he tried to enter the building. Then she turned to me and said he was coming today. She could feel it. She was right. At 10:47 a.m., the front desk receptionist called my phone. Her voice was nervous when she said there was a man downstairs asking to see me. His name was Thomas Bennett. I told her I wasn't available, but Wilma took the phone from my hand and told him to send him up immediately. Thomas Bennett walked into the office 5 minutes later. He looked completely different from the broken man I'd found in the parking garage 7 months ago. His suit was perfectly tailored. His hair was neatly combed, and he carried himself with the confidence of someone who owned half the city. But his eyes were the same, tired and haunted, like he'd seen too much and couldn't forget it. Wilma positioned herself between him and me like a barrier. Her voice was ice when she accused him of harassing her assistant. Thomas looked genuinely confused. Then he saw me sitting in the corner, and his expression changed to recognition and relief. He said my name and told me he wasn't sure I'd remember him. Wilma blocked him when he tried to step toward me. She told him that whatever he wanted with me had to go through her first. Thomas smiled sadly and said he wasn't there to hurt me. He said he owed me his life. Wilma demanded to know why he'd sent flowers and cryptic notes if all he wanted was to thank me. Thomas explained that he hadn't known my name that night in the garage. It had taken him 6 months to find me. He'd hired a private investigator who pulled security footage from the building and tracked me down. Then he pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket. Wilma tensed, but it was just paper. He held it out to me and said it was an offer. Not money, a job offer. I took the envelope and read it. Thomas Bennett was offering me a position as executive assistant to the CEO of Bennett Technologies. That meant working directly for him. The salary was double what I currently made. Full benefits. And a signing bonus large enough to cover a year's worth of Gloria's expenses. The room went silent. I could feel Wilma staring at me, but I couldn't look at her. I asked Thomas how he knew about my daughter. He said his investigator had looked into my life. He wanted to understand who I was and what mattered to me. When he found out about Gloria and the custody situation, he knew he could offer me something that actually meant something. I told him he'd investigated me without my permission. He said he had, and he wasn't sorry. He reminded me that I'd sat with him in a parking garage for 20 minutes without knowing who he was or wanting anything in return. In his world, people like that didn't exist. So, yes, he'd investigated me because he wanted to make sure I was real. Wilma's voice shook with barely controlled anger when she told him to get out of her office. Thomas looked at me one last time and said to think about it. The offer stood for 72 hours. Then he walked out. The silence after he left was suffocating. Wilma stood at the window with her back to me. When she finally spoke, she said I wasn't actually considering this. I told her I didn't know. She spun around and her face was a mixture of hurt and fury. She explained that Thomas Bennett had been trying to destroy her company for 3 years. If I worked for him, I'd have access to information about her strategies, her clients, her weaknesses. I'd be handing him ammunition even if I didn't mean to. I told her I wouldn't tell him anything. She said I wouldn't have to, just by being there and seeing how his company worked. I'd learn things he could use. She was right. I knew she was right. But that number on the offer letter kept flashing in my mind. Double my salary, a signing bonus, real benefits, a chance at a real life instead of just surviving. I said quietly that he was offering me a life, not just survival, but actually living. Wilma's voice cracked when she asked what I thought she'd been offering me. She said she brought me into her office and had been trying to really see me for the first time. She asked if that meant nothing. I looked at her, and for the first time I saw past the Ice Queen exterior. I saw someone who was scared, not of losing an employee, but of losing something else. Something she hadn't even admitted to herself yet. I asked her why she cared when I was just her assistant. She said I wasn't just anything. Then she turned back to the window and told me to go home, take the rest of the day, and think about what I wanted. But I needed to know that if I took that job, we were done, not just professionally. She wouldn't be able to look at me the same way. I wanted to ask what she meant by that. I wanted her to say the things she was clearly thinking but not saying. But the look on her face stopped me. So I left. I walked out of the building and caught a train without knowing where I was going. My phone buzzed with a text from Rachel saying Gloria had a fever and she was taking her to the doctor. I met them there. It turned out to be just a cold, nothing serious. But sitting in that waiting room with my ex-wife and my daughter, I kept thinking about the offer in my pocket. Rachel asked me later if I was going to take the job. She said I deserved better than what I had, and if this offer was better, I should take it. She told me not to let fear or guilt hold me back. She said sometimes I needed to choose myself for once. That night, I called my older brother David and told him everything. He said it sounded like my boss hadn't seen me until someone else showed interest, and that wasn't care, it was possessiveness. He said if this job gave me breathing room and meant I could actually be there for Gloria without constantly worrying about money, then I should take it. I didn't know Wilma grant my loyalty just because she finally noticed I existed. He was right. Logically, he was completely right. But logic didn't explain why my chest tightened when I thought about never seeing Wilma again. I went to bed without an answer and woke up the next morning still not knowing what I wanted. Friday morning, I arrived at 6:45 and found Wilma's car already in the parking garage. When I walked into her office, she was standing at the window. She didn't turn around when I entered, but I knew she'd heard me. The roses were gone from my desk. She'd had them removed overnight. I said good morning. She asked if it was a good morning. Then she asked if I had made my decision. I told her not yet. She said I had until Sunday. That's what Thomas had said. 72 hours. She told me she wouldn't try to convince me to stay, because that wouldn't be fair. But she needed to know if I was leaving so she could prepare. I asked what she needed to prepare for. She said the damage I would do. Not because I was a spy, but because I knew how she worked. I knew her patterns, her weaknesses, her tells. That was valuable information to Thomas Bennett. I started to protest, but she cut me off. She said she knew I'd never intentionally hurt her, but I wouldn't have to. Just by existing in Thomas's orbit, by being in his company, I'd change things. She pulled out a folder that had arrived that morning from the board. Inside were printed emails and documents, meeting notes, strategy discussions, client lists, all dated from the last 6 months. She explained that someone on the board thought I'd been feeding information to Thomas Bennett. They had parking garage footage of me meeting with him 7 months ago. They were calling for an investigation. I stared at the documents in shock. They thought I was a corporate spy because I'd helped a stranger having a panic attack in a parking garage. Wilma said she told the board it was ridiculous, but they wanted answers. They wanted to know why Thomas Bennett's assistant was receiving flowers and job offers from him. They wanted to know if I could be trusted. She said if I took the job with Thomas, it would look like they were right. It would look like I'd been working with him all along. It would destroy her credibility with the board and damage her company's reputation. But more than that, it would destroy whatever was building between us. She said that part quietly, almost like she didn't mean to say out loud. I asked her what was building between us. She finally turned from the window and looked at me. Her eyes were red like she'd been crying, which seemed impossible for someone like Wilma Grant. She said she didn't know exactly, but it was something that made her notice when I walked into a room. Something that made her chest hurt when she thought about me working for someone else. Something that scared her more than losing clients or market share or board approval. I told her I had a daughter who needed things I couldn't afford. I told her I'd been barely surviving for 3 years, and this job offers a chance to actually live. I asked her what she expected me to do. She said she expected me to choose myself, choose what was best for me and Gloria. But she also said she was choosing me. She'd already made her decision. She was choosing to trust me and fight for me and risk everything on the possibility that what she felt might be real. But she needed to know if I was choosing her back. At noon, Thomas Bennett called my cell phone. He said he knew his visit yesterday had complicated things. He said the offer still stood, but he wanted me to understand something. 7 months ago in that parking garage, I'd saved his life. Not dramatically, but truly. He'd been seconds away from doing something permanent when I'd sat down next to him. He said most people would have walked past or called security or treated him like he was dangerous. But I treated him like he was human. He said he was offering me this job because he wanted people like me in his company. People who saw other people instead of just obstacles or opportunities. But he also said he knew about Wilma. He said he'd seen the way she looked at me when he was in her office. He said if I had something real there, something worth fighting for, then maybe I should fight for it instead of running toward money and security. I asked him why he cared. He said because 7 months ago I'd shown him kindness when I had no reason to. The least he could do was return the favor by being honest. He told me the offer would stay open for the full 72 hours, but I should make sure I was choosing the right thing for the right reasons. After I hung up, I sat at my desk in Wilma's office and thought about what the right thing was. I thought about Gloria and child support and bills and survival. I thought about Wilma and the way her voice cracked when she said we'd be done. I thought about being invisible versus being seen. I thought about safety versus risk. Then I made my decision. I walked over to Wilma's desk, where she was pretending to work on her computer. I told her I wasn't taking the job with Thomas Bennett. She looked up at me with something like hope in her eyes and asked why not. I said because I'd spent 13 months being invisible, and the moment someone else saw me, she'd finally started looking. That was worth more than double salary and signing bonuses. But I also told her I had conditions. If she wanted me to stay, it couldn't be because she was scared of losing to Thomas Bennett. It had to be because she actually saw me, really saw me, not as an assistant or a possession or a piece in her corporate game, as Michael, as a father who was doing his best, as a person who deserved to be seen. Wilma stood up and walked around her desk. She stood in front of me, close enough that I could smell her perfume. She said she saw me. She'd been trying to see me for weeks, but hadn't known how to say it. She'd built her entire life around being in control, and I made her feel out of control in ways that terrified and thrilled her. She asked what we did now. I said we figured out together. No more glass walls between us. No more her being the boss and me being the assistant. Just two people trying to build something real. She smiled for the first time since the roses had arrived. Then she did something completely unexpected. She called her executive team into a meeting and announced that I was being promoted to chief of staff, a real position with real authority, and a salary that would let me breathe. She said she was done pretending I was furniture, and anyone who had a problem with it could talk to her directly. After the meeting, I called Thomas Bennett and declined his offer. I thanked him for seeing me when nobody else did, both in the parking garage and in his job offer. He laughed and said he'd suspected this would happen. He said Wilma Grant was lucky to have someone willing to choose her over security. Then he wished me luck and hung up. That night, I picked up Gloria from Rachel's house. My daughter asked if everything was okay at work. I told her it was better than okay. She asked if I was still invisible. I knelt down and looked her in the eyes and told her I wasn't invisible anymore, not to the people who mattered. Monday morning, I walked into the office at 7:15, the same time as Wilma. We rode the elevator up together. When we stepped onto the 42nd floor, people stared. Word had already spread about my promotion and about the flowers and about Thomas Bennett. But I didn't care about the staring anymore. Wilma's shoes clicked across the marble, but this time I walked beside her instead of behind her. We went to her office together. My new desk was next to hers, not in the corner. Equal ground. No more watching through glass walls. She poured 2 cups of coffee and handed me one. Then she smiled and said this was going to be complicated. I smiled back and said most things worth having were complicated. She asked if I was scared. I told her I was terrified, but I was also done being invisible. We sat down at our desks and started working, side by side, visible, together, and for the first time in 3 years, I felt like I could breathe. The roses had changed everything. They'd taken me from furniture to human, from invisible to seen, from surviving to living. And while I'd never know for sure, I like to think that maybe the roses hadn't been about gratitude at all. Maybe they'd been about showing Wilma what she'd been missing. Maybe Thomas Bennett had sent them knowing exactly what would happen. Maybe sometimes it takes 3 dozen roses to make someone finally look up and see what's been in front of them all along. The end. So here's the real question. Did you subscribe yet? Thousands of people will listen to this story and won't subscribe. Please don't be that person. Kindly support what I do here by subscribing. And then drop in the comment section if you like part 2. What challenges will they face as a new blended family? Let me know if you want to hear more.